Hey everybody, nearly missed the day, but here I am. My name's Stephen Bernstein. I'm DGAWJ and ASC. I'm a cinematographer on a feature film, and we start shooting at about 8 or 9 days. Um, you know, right now, only 8 or 9 days out, things in the office are changing. And what's happening, although everybody's been very professional and working very hard, is there's a bit of fear setting in because all of us work as freelancers. And the worry is always that you will end up taking responsibility for something that may or may not be your fault. And with responsibility comes blame. With blame comes injury to one's reputation. It's difficult when you're trying to be creative to find the balance between taking risks and not subverting or undermining your own future. Creative process requires risk taking, measured and thoughtful risk taking, but all the same, risk taking. To play something safe or always take the easiest route doesn't mean that you're going to do the best writing, create the best cinematography, or make the best film. At the same time, you have a fiduciary and moral responsibility to the producers and to your fellow crew members and artists to make sure that the film is completed successfully. And successfully means not only a film that works creatively, but a film that works financially, that comes in on budget and then delivers profit subsequently. So this is the balance that we all have to struggle with. So as, for example, we look at an individual shot and we start thinking about things like extras. In a sequence of an independent film that is denuded of background performers, inevitably the film looks contrived. It's not the way we experience the world typically. We share the world with other living, breathing bipeds, and when we go to, say, for a bar, and this film has several bar scenes, we expect there to be people there. The fewer the people, unless it's motivated by, say, it's a mid-afternoon sequence, the more artificial the scene seems. The more artificial the scene seems, the less likely the drama is to work. So that's the dilemma because extras are expensive. Each extra has to be fed. Each extra has to pass through hair and makeup. You need extra PAs, assistant directors. That's difficult. The same thing with location work. If we limit the film to only a few locations, the world can seem very, very small and uninteresting. But if we go to a lot of locations, it means that we have location moves in the middle of the day, and as we've talked about before, that means that you're not working economically and you're not getting as many shooting minutes in the day. Really, ultimately, in your analysis, you want to give as much time to the director as you possibly can because the director is going to want time with those actors, and ultimately, the better the performance, the better the film. Sure, lighting matters very much, camera position, all the rest in each of the other departments, the art department, sound, wardrobe, and so on. But ultimately, we're in the service of actors and facilitating their process and their performances. And when we're taking time from them by moving vehicles, by setting up complex lighting setups, then ultimately we're subverting the film. We do, as I mentioned the other day, have a lot of driving stuff in this film, and driving comes, as I said yesterday, with the necessity for lockdowns and for police and for resets, which is a difficulty. Just generally in thinking about where you place your base camp, it's very, very important because if you have to shuttle equipment and people backwards and forward from base camp to where your shoot is, there's an exponential factor, which you should always figure, which each time you move a crew member or a piece of equipment, it takes just a few minutes. Those few minutes add up, and it sucks up a lot of the time in your day. And again, you're taking time from that director. So you're always trying to make decisions based on analysis of all these things. And ultimately, you don't want to do anything that leads to a catastrophe. But at the same time, if you don't push the boat out, if you don't examine in lighting something that will be emotive and powerful but involves some potential risk, if you don't think about an analysis of performance, possibly those clarion moments for a character to realize something about themselves, to do something, I was saying the other day in my analysis of the first act, something extraordinary or unusual, that's a risk. and it may go to some extreme of behavior that is not typical of the way a person behaves in the ordinary world. But that's kind of the point, because as I said the other day, when someone does something unusual or eccentric, it becomes a compelling moment in the narrative that the audience will then be inclined to analyze. But it involves risk, because if it's not consistent with the way a character would typically behave, an audience may look at that and say, that doesn't seem real, it doesn't pass the test of verisimilitude, and therefore I don't believe this performance, and therefore I'm not engaged and empathic with the characters, and the whole film is subverted. That's the balance, and that's what risk-taking is determining when the risk has a higher likelihood of success and when it has a higher likelihood of failure. And that's what artists, like directors, do, and that's what the director in this film is already doing so successfully in making an analysis of each of these actions, be it from actors, from different department heads, and measuring the likelihood of individual success and therefore the success of the overall film. But then, as we're all meeting together, discussions between assistant directors, cinematographers, production managers, the art department, location managers, everybody is thinking, of course, collectively about the good of the film, but also very aware of the individual risk that they're taking. That if they take a responsibility for a decision that they make, and that it fails, they will be held individually responsible for possibly the failure of the whole film. So there is a natural momentum towards safety and away from creative risk, and with that move towards safety, there's a move away ultimately from the greatest artistic realization. So it's difficult, and it's difficult to stand your individual ground and say, hey, let's take a breath, let's decide what's best, and let's measure these individual risks and determine where we have the greatest likelihood of success and pursue that to make a greater film, even though there is some risk of failure involved. At the same time, you can't ever proceed ahead really responsibly when the risk of failure becomes too great and the entire film could be jeopardized. So that's the balance, and that's the dance that we're doing right now. Why is it so critical in these days? Because a film is a grand circus. It is the construction of an opera, of really a whole little miniature civilization in a very small period of time. A great deal of money is spent. A great many people have come from diverse and varied backgrounds, and then in a very short period of time, you have to put that whole thing together, shoot your film, and make sure it's successful. I think Martin Scorsese once described it as a painter sitting on a railway track. And I don't think he's far wrong. And all of us are painters, and all of us are on railway tracks. And those tracks are rumbling, and we sense the potential risk that is charging towards us. So that is something that we have to be aware of. That is something that we're doing, and that is where the individual crises are coming. As people are aware that only a few days we're shooting, and they're thinking, well, if we make this decision, for example, where our base camp is, if we decide to shoot something, for example, in day rather than night, that has an impact. Night sequences are harder, but sometimes they support the drama better. So what do? Do you do the more difficult shot and get it right, or do the easier shot? But how big is the sacrifice? Does all the drama disappear, or just a little bit of it? So that's what's going on right now. That's where we're at. Everyone's well-intentioned. It's a good bunch of people, honest, forthright, some very, very gifted people, some very thoughtful ones, and we'll get there in the end. And we just have to remember, all of us and all of you, that when you're about 2 weeks out, everyone's going to think it's kind of the end of the world, the end of the career. The movie's surely going to be over budget, over schedule, and not work. And then somehow, generally, usually, in these last days, we put the things together. And if it seems that we're not, then those draconian actions have to be done. You have to cut back on days, locations, shoots, but there's time to do all that. The first thing you do is try to make the best film you can, and then when it turns and it becomes obvious that you can't do that, then you have to make those certain sacrifices. And we're in that in-between time right now, that gray area where we haven't made the sacrifices totally yet. We've done everything we can to be as efficient as we possibly can, but we know that there are hard decisions coming in the near future. Thanks very much for listening. Bye.